All right, so I want to kick things off with a personal story. It's something that really got me thinking about a pretty big idea, that the way we organize what we know, well, that's never a neutral act. It's always a political choice. So this friend asks me, what was the biggest culture shock when you moved to the States? And, my answer wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't about the food or, I don't know, the driving. It was something way deeper, something that gets at the very heart of how a society thinks and how it remembers its own past.
So what I told him was this. It's the bizarrely unsystematic nature of college education here, especially in the humanities. I mean, you can spend years becoming the world's leading expert on some incredibly niche topic, right? Think, I don't know, the economics of 17th century Caribbean pirates, without ever once being asked to explain how that piece fits into the grand puzzle of history. And at first, yeah, I definitely meant that as a criticism. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just describing a weakness, I was describing a core feature of the entire system.
And that realization really led me to frame this whole thing in terms of two competing models, two different ways of building our understanding of the past. I call them the cathedral and the anti-cathedral.
See, my background is in the Soviet tradition. And in that world, the humanities were built exactly like a cathedral. You had to lay the foundation first, the absolute basics, then came the walls in a very specific order. Only after all of that could you even think about the towers and domes. The point was that everything had a specific place in this giant, single, coherent structure. It wasn't just about learning facts. It was about imposing this powerful, unified meaning onto everything.
And right away, you can see the pros and cons, right? The beauty of the cathedral model is obvious. You get depth, you get breadth, you get this incredible shared orientation, and a really long collective memory. But, and this is a huge but, the danger is that cathedrals don't just preserve memory, they impose meaning. And when things get tense, that shared memory can really quickly harden into shared grievance. And grievance, that hardens into a sense of destiny. And let me tell you, if you want to mobilize a population for war, nothing works better than a cathedral.
Now, the American model is, well, it's the exact opposite. It's what I call the anti-cathedral. It's fundamentally suspicious of that kind of all-encompassing monumental architecture. The universities are intentionally fragmented. The narrative is always up for debate. And students are basically set loose to wander between all these competing little mini-castles, assembling their own major from a grab bag of classes.
Now, this kind of fragmentation has a massive political upside. It actively resists the consolidation of one single grand narrative. It makes it really hard for one story to freeze itself into stone. That very movement between different ideas, different frameworks, it acts like a kind of solvent. It dissolves dogma. But it's fragile in a totally different way. Because it's so open, it might just quietly allow someone to start building a new cathedral right inside it, and no one would even notice until it was too late.
So, let's just lay it all out. The cathedral, it imposes structure. That gives you meaning, but it can also breed grievance. And its biggest weakness, it's incredibly fragile when faced with a reality that doesn't fit the blueprint. The anti-cathedral, on the other hand, it thrives on fragmentation. That gives you freedom, but it can also lead to a kind of aimless drift. And its weakness, it's super vulnerable to a new dogma sneaking in under the radar.
Okay, but here's the real twist. For all their differences, for all their opposing philosophies, both of these systems, the cathedral and the anti-cathedral, they share a critical, fundamental flaw. They both make a big promise about the future, a promise that, it turns out, neither one of them can actually keep.
Think about it. The cathedral promises you foresight because its narrative is so coherent and complete. The anti-cathedral promises you foresight because it considers so many different perspectives. And yet, they both fail. Both systems are just terrible at actually predicting major world events. And the war in Ukraine made this failure just painfully obvious. I mean, we had all this knowledge, right? Decades of deep expertise on Russian history, on post-Soviet politics, on nationalism, and it didn't matter if that knowledge was organized into a neat cathedral or scattered across an anti-cathedral. There was absolutely no consensus that this invasion was going to happen. And that's the thing about history. It's pretty good at showing you the pressures, the possibilities, but it's awful at telling you if and when a possibility is about to become a reality.
So this complete failure of history to act like some kind of oracle, it's why I've become much more interested in historiography. It's a subtle but crucial difference. See, history tries to tell you what happened. Historiography is a lot more honest. It says, let's study how people choose to tell the story of what happened. It's not about the events themselves, but about the architecture of the narratives we build around them.
Now, I know that might sound a little academic, a little abstract, but stick with me, because maybe the best, most vivid demonstration of this whole idea comes from somewhere, well, somewhere you'd probably never expect.
So who is this unexpected master of historiography? Who is it that's so good at playing with the very architecture of memory?
Believe it or not, it's Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but his movies are just these brilliant masterclass exercises in tearing down and rearranging narrative structures, forcing you to look at the politics of how we remember things.
Just look at what he does with the actor Christoph Waltz. It's genius. In Inglourious Basterds, Waltz's European sophistication is this chilling, elegant evil. And American crudeness, that's the tool for violent justice. Okay, then in Django Unchained, he takes the exact same actor and completely flips the polarity. Suddenly, Waltz's European sophistication is the voice of moral conscience, and American brutality, now that's the refined domestic institution. See? He's not trying to preserve historical monuments. He's taking the pieces and completely rearranging the architecture. And this, right here, is the key to understanding his whole method. Tarantino doesn't have a library in his head, with all the books in their proper place, haunted by the ghost of some single monumental cathedral. No, he has a video store. And in a video store, everything is a fragment. Every movie is a piece that's available for recombination, totally free from some sacred overarching structure. If you're looking for a European equivalent, you might think of someone like Alexandre Dumas. He basically treated history like his personal toy box, right? Just grabbing famous historical figures and having them do whatever he wanted. But here's the telling part. He could only get away with that after the French Revolution. He was writing in the rubble, after a massive political and cultural cathedral had been violently torn down. The old meanings were gone.
All right, so this all brings us to the final, and I think most important point. It's about the politics of memory and why paying attention to the architecture is absolutely crucial.
If you take away one thing from all of this, let it be this. History is never just what happened. It is always the structure we choose to place those happenings into. And that structure, that is always a political choice.
So in the end, here's the trade-off we're left with. The cathedral offers meaning and orientation, but it comes packaged with grievance and rigidity. The anti-cathedral offers freedom and flexibility, but at the risk of shallowness and getting blindsided by a new dogma. And the tough truth is, neither system really delivers on its biggest promises.
And that's why, ultimately, the most valuable thing we can do might not be trying to build a perfect cathedral or a perfectly open anti-cathedral. Maybe it's just to practice historiography. Because historiography, at least, is more interested in studying the architecture than in worshiping inside of it. And really, understanding how these stories are built. That's the first real step toward understanding the power they have over all of us.